Welcome to How is God Calling You? A production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. It is a show that seeks to stimulate and assist youth and young adults to discover the path that God has chosen for them. Vocations to the priesthood, religious life, marriage, and single life will all be discussed. Your program host is Father James Corda.
Hello, welcome to our show, How is God Calling You? I'm Father Jim Corda. Today we're going to talk with the Sisters of St. Francis of Tiffin, Ohio. And joining me in today's show is Sister Karen and Sister Roberta. It's such a pleasure to have you on our show today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
When we talk primarily about vocations to the priesthood, religious life, we talk about a vocation. And so before we talk a little bit about your specific community, let's talk about what a vocation is, and that might give some idea to the folks that are with us what we're talking about. Sister Karen?
Well, for me, a vocation is a call, and it's like there's a yearning deep within you that's moving you to respond in a special way with the various gifts and talents that you have. And I believe that that's God moving within us, within me, to move in the direction that God wants me to move, to do what God wants.
Now, Sister Roberta, I'll call you Sister Bobby if that's all right.
That's fine.
In discerning your vocation, what was some of the things that were in your mind and in your heart as you thought about religious life? What was something that drew you to a vocation to religious life?
Well, from early on, I have to tell you that I wanted to be a teacher. That was always my drive as far as a job or ministry went. But the basis of it was that I wanted to be of service. Now, I don't think I used that language when I was thinking about it, but I also went to Catholic school most of my life, and I really was at a point where I didn't want to be a sister. I fought that idea. And so it wasn't until I was in college that I met the Tiffin Franciscans, and it was their joyfulness in serving that really attracted me. They were happy people, and yet they were so excited about what they were doing for other people, and that was really the drawing card for me.
You know, it's so interesting that you mentioned that, because I think if you talk to anyone with a vocation in religious life or priesthood, there's always someone that kind of loved you into that. There's always someone that you look up to and you think, I kind of would like to be like that. You know?
Yes.
So that's really fundamental, I think, to the call of a vocation. Let's talk a little bit about your specific community, about the Sisters of St. Francis. Obviously, St. Francis is the patron saint. Tell us a little bit about your community and your charism.
Well, our community was started right after the Civil War because of the necessity to take care of elderly and take care of widows and orphans in that Tiffin area. And so they purchased, Father Bean and Mother Schaefer purchased land, farm, and that's how our community started. And so that charism just kind of continues. The care of the earth, because we are very rural, and the care of the elderly, which we still continue to this day, and the care of orphans eventually moved into teaching in schools and that. So,
you know, when we talk about religious life, obviously there's many facets of religious life and religious communities. They don't just focus on one particular thing, but religious life involves lots of different things. So when we say, what does a sister do, or what does a religious woman do, they do a lot of things.
Well, they do, and just in our community we have teachers. We don't have too many are still in the schools, but people who are in nursing, pastoral care, pastoral service within the parishes, retreat work. Really the doors are wide open to anything that is of service to people and fits within our charism. And so, wherever I am, I need to be a peacemaker. Wherever I am, I need to be concerned about the earth and involved with contemplation and action. So that's the basis for us.
There was one word, Sister Bobby, that you mentioned that I wanted to go back to, and that is there was something joyful about it. And a lot of people don't find joy in what they do. And so joy is really, I think, a basis and fundamental to life, any life or in any vocation. And how is that joy celebrated in particular, first of all, in your community, but also in your own personal lives?
Well, joy and simplicity are two of the things that attracted me to the Sisters of St. Francis when I was in high school. And it just, whenever I went to visit at the convent, that was like magnetic, and I love that. And so I really feel like no matter what kind of work you're doing, whether it's your career or your ministry, you have to love what you're doing. And if you love what you're doing and love those you're working with, then that joy will be there. It's like automatic. And that joy also brings with it energy and spontaneity and all the other wonderful gifts of the Spirit that we need to exhibit.
And that's obviously your experience as well.
As well, yes. And I think it's in our ministries wherever we are, but also when we go back home to Tiffin, we're truly happy to see each other. And as serious as we can be, because we'll have assemblies and write papers and declarations of what we're going to do, which are very serious, we can also turn around and have an absolutely great time together. So joy is really a part of our lives all the time.
And I guess that brings me to another question. How does one maintain that within their vocation? Because obviously there's good days, bad days. We would be fooling ourselves to let people know that, everything's all wonderful. But how do we maintain that, I guess, centering or rootedness in that virtue of joy for us? How would you do that? How would you share that with someone that's with us? What is that all about?
Well, I think being faithful to our time of prayer and contemplation each day, during which time we can really get in touch with what's happening within us, around us, the different ways we are being challenged, giving the joys and the sorrows and the difficulties and the challenges back to our God, and asking God to be a part of all of that. And I think when we do that, even though there's sorrow and frustration and challenges, there's that deep sense of peace and joy that still comes through.
Whenever we talk about vocations, there's always those, especially nowadays in our very high-tech, modern, fast-paced world that we live in, people want to know, well, what did you do to prepare? What was behind your process of becoming a religious woman, a sister? So what would you share with them that's involved in all of that? It's obviously not just one day they say, I want to be a sister, and the next day they're a sister. There's obviously a process. So what would be some things that they would need to know in preparation for religious life?
Well, I think the first thing is to look around at different communities. And of course today they do a lot of that on the websites, as well as visiting different groups. And it's the one-on-one connection with somebody from a community. And to spend time, like we have women who come and spend 2 or 3 days with us, so that they can get a sense over time, what does this life involve and how do these women live? And both at the Mother House as well as out on the missions. And I think it's that connection. It's they're encouraged to have a spiritual director, we all are, so that you can talk about the ups and the downs of the life and where is God calling you. So there's also study involved once they actually enter the process. So, and that's done in varying ways depending on the person's education that they already have, as well as their background. So I just went down and spent 2 weeks in Chiapas, Mexico, to work with a novice who's down there. Well, it was my delight. But again, my task was to work with her on the Francis and Claire through the lens of conversion, and looking at that within her own life. Where is conversion being called for her? So, each person is uniquely helped according to where they're at in their own religious training.
And the other thing you had mentioned earlier is obviously there's a different charism for every religious community. And so there might be a charism that someone is attracted to, whether it's working with the earth or the poor or the orphans or whatever the charism. And so maybe focusing on what that is and what's important for them in religious life. We're coming to the close of our first segment together, so we don't have a lot of time, but I'd like to go back to Francis and Claire that Sister Bobby talked about. How important are the lives of those two saints, not only in your religious community, but in your personal life?
Well, Francis and Claire are extremely important, and obviously our directional statement and our charism flows from the life of Francis. Francis was very, I know we associate him with birds, but Francis was about way more than that. And Francis just had a special connection with creation and a very deep respect for all that God made, as well as people. And so that is very much a part of our lives. And Francis was a very deep contemplative. And that's the part that sometimes we don't focus on. And so if the prayer and contemplation aren't there as part of our lives, then everything else we do doesn't have the same meaning. And Claire too. Claire, I think Francis and Claire are a beautiful balance to each other, because we are able to see the masculinity and the femininity in a wonderful, with a wonderful connection. And so I think that's really a blessing for us as Franciscans too.
The other part of that is your ministry with and among other people, lay people. How important is that, coming down to 1 minute left, in your life, sister?
Well, it's absolutely crucial for me. It keeps me balanced. They help me with even the humor, but especially to be able to do faith sharing with them. They add to my faith as well as I hope I do to them. But the ministry to the people, the service, is the most important thing for me.
We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back. Please stay with us. We'll be right back.
I am Marino.
Je suis Marino.
I am Marino.
I believe that we are all connected to each other, and that it is the gift of compassion that unites us and makes us one. It doesn't matter what language, culture, or tradition we come from. We can share compassion wherever we are.
Marino, an American Catholic organization of priests and brothers, has been reaching out to those in need for nearly 100 years in 26 countries throughout the world. Marino dedicates 86 cents of every dollar donated to their programs, and with your help, they can do more. Missioners, workers, volunteers, supporters, we are all Marino.
I am Marino.
Yo soy Marino.
I'm Father Mike, and I am Marino.
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 Welcome back to our show. We're talking with Sister Karen and Sister Bobby, who are the Sisters of St. Francis of Tiffin, Ohio. And it's nice to have you again on our show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We want to talk specifically about the full meaning of what it is to be a religious woman in in the world today, but also in the life of the church? That's kind of a big, loaded question, I would think. So we'll try to break it down and talk about it in practical terms. How important, first of all, is the role of religious women in the life of the church? We know it is. How has it been celebrated in your particular lives?
Well, I guess that is a loaded question. I think that religious women are such a vital part of the church because of how, from the very beginning, religious communities or women who felt committed to make a difference and make changes in this country came to this country to begin something. And they didn't have a lot to work with. Actually, they had practically nothing. And so it was their own passion, their own fervor that I think invited others to join them, and then to move on from there and look at what the needs of the times were and then move ahead. And so I think that same challenge is with us today in this century, to look at what the needs of the times are and move with that. And that's why we continue to have so many different changes in how and what religious women do.
And that brings to mind something that I probably haven't thought about until just this moment when you mentioned it. It almost goes back to the religious founders themselves. It's almost like you carry on their work, their mission. These men and women across the centuries had this passion and this desire to do something within the church, whatever their call was. And so they felt so that it was so important to do it that they brought other people along to do it. And so that really was the germination of religious life. And that's why there's so many different charisms, because the need was so great, but yet the focus was so exact and so important that they focused on that. So I think it's almost you carry on the mission of your founders.
Yes.
That's true. If I could build on that just a bit with Francis, originally he heard Christ saying to him, "Rebuild my church." And he literally thought he needed to take the brick and mortar and rebuild the building. And it's over time that he learned that it really was speaking forth and creating, the new image of the church at that time. And even with Claire, her intention was to create a new form of religious life for women. And so to take what was a very strict caste system within a religious congregation, and Claire decided there would be no separation of classes. So I think that's what we try to continue with in our charism, is to not be afraid of change, to not be afraid to move forward and stretch the borders, push the boundaries a little bit. And I think that's part of our gift to the church, is to be able to stretch it and say, hey, what if we try this? Maybe it'll work. And if it doesn't, we try something else.
That's right. The other thing I'd like us to talk about briefly is someone that might be with us watching and want to know, what's your typical day like? Obviously, every day is different in the life of everybody, but what would be a typical day be like in your ministry? Sister Karen?
Well, because I'm a pastoral minister for the Hispanic community, yes, every day is different for me. And some days I really don't know all that's going to happen until the phone rings or until someone knocks on my office door. And because a part of my ministry is outreach and being compassionate and being welcoming to the Hispanics in whatever way I can, because that's really the main object of my ministry, is to help the Hispanic community feel welcome and needed and important in our society here in the United States today. Because of a lot of the political hoopla that's going on, it's extremely difficult sometimes. And so My outreach consists of listening. It consists of counseling. It consists of going to the homes and visiting them, playing with the children, taking the children to doctor's appointments whenever and however that happens, dentist appointments, making a lot of appointments for them, whether it's legal concerns or whether it's with Job and Family Services, whether it's with the schools, doing a lot of interpreting for them. So all of that is kind of part of the outreach. But then I also do the pastoral element of helping them prepare for the sacraments, celebrating the sacraments with them, helping make sure that we have a well-planned liturgy every Sunday. And so it's just really different each day depending on what the needs are.
We're going to come back in a minute and talk a little bit more about the Hispanic ministry and community, but I'd like Sister Bobby to tell us what one of her typical days is like.
Well, first of all, I want to say that our life is pretty disciplined because we do get up early. We start with prayer. We pray both individually and then we pray our morning prayers together. And that's the way our day begins most days, unless Bobby's out on the road. But, you know, we still do that no matter where we are. And then to move into your ministry. So my days obviously are different every day. I do spend quite a bit of time in meetings, organizing programs, especially for the Spirituality Center. I also spend time studying and reading in order to prepare retreats and programs. But one of my gifts is that I'm able to go out and meet new groups of people. So I go into parishes or I go into other retreat centers or mother houses and give retreats that way. I also do spiritual direction. So I meet people individually and one-on-one and spend time with them talking about where is God calling them and what is happening within their prayer life. And so even though it's different every day, it's filled with lots of contacts with people as well as time of study and prayer.
And we're going to come back to you and talk a little bit more about that as well. But let's talk about the Hispanic community. And we know within our diocese, some parishes have particular ministries to the Hispanic because of the geography, because they're living and working in the communities. What has been one of the greatest gifts that the Hispanic people have brought to the local church, and what has been something that's a big struggle with and among the Hispanic community?
Well, I think definitely one of their gifts, they have many, but one of them that continues to inspire me is that they live with so much, in a sense, fear, concern, questions about what's happening next for them. But in spite of that fear and those concerns and frustrations, they have a deep sense of hope. The Spanish word for that is esperanza. And esperanza is what I see and experience all the time in them. And they have a way of being so joyful and so hopeful. And in our liturgical celebrations, I mean, we have just a lot of people, if they happen to be walking by the church when we're having Mass, that, you know, our music, our liturgies are so uplifting and so filled with joy and hope. So that truly is a wonderful gift they bring to us. And I'm sorry, what was the challenge?
What would be some of the challenges that they experience as Hispanics within the community?
Well, I think just the basic challenge of being in a foreign culture is difficult. And trying to learn our ways, but not completely, because they still want to retain some of their own traditions and part of their own culture. Sometimes the young people want to completely separate themselves from their culture and just inundate themselves with our culture. The best scenario for that is integration, but that doesn't always happen because there's some holding on that want to just hold on to the tradition of their own. and some want to let it go completely, but the integration is really what we're looking for. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge for a lot of the families. And of course, learning the language is extremely difficult for some of them, especially our friends from Guatemala who also speak a lot of idiomas, and then the Spanish and now the English, and so that's very much of a challenge, yes.
Sister Bobby, I'd like to go back. We're coming down to the end of our time together. In your work with spiritual direction, let's say someone is interested in religious life. What would be something that you would encourage them to think about in a process of discerning a vocation, in particular for your religious community? What are some of the questions that they need to ask themselves before taking seriously a commitment to religious life?
Well, I would ask them, first of all, to how is their own prayer life? How do they feel God is speaking to them at the time? How do they deal with the ups and downs of life? And what is it that's drawing them? Is it a certain individual, or is it a commitment to a way of life, to a service to people, so that we separate that individual attraction from, what is the core of being a religious woman. So I would encourage them to practice some of the things that we practice as far as our prayer life, going to liturgy, being in groups of discussion and faith sharing, and to get feedback for themselves as to how is that enhancing their life, and what do they find difficult about it, and are those things that they can deal with, and what are their relationships with other people, both religious and non-religious. So it has to be done over a long period of time, and it's questions that we have to keep asking ourselves throughout our entire lives. It's not like I become a religious and that's it. But, we always talk about there's initial formation and there's ongoing formation. And that's the challenge always, is to continue to grow in my faith and in my commitment.
Well, Sister Bobby, Sister Karen, it was such a pleasure to have you on our show today. God bless you in your particular ministries and also in our religious life. We thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you for being with us. Have a good day, and God be with you.
How is God Calling You is a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. Your program host was Father James Corda.
"33 million Americans have descended into poverty. And as their futures fall, so does our nation's.